Hello, everyone. Welcome back to season 3 of the Go To Masters podcast, where we talk to GTM leaders from some of the fastest growing businesses out there and we bring you what they've learned through their experience. Joining us today is Jane Akczinski, Global Sales Com Manager at Rithum. Thank you for being here today, Jane. Could you please share a little bit about yourself for our listeners?
Well, thank you for inviting me. Again, my name is Jane. I'm currently the manager of incentives and compensations at Rhythms, where I design and manage global sales compensation programs. So I've spent most of my career in sales operations and finance, sort of that arena, where I have the intersection of data, strategy, and people. I love taking things that are very complex, like comp plans or performance data, and turning them into something meaningful that helps teams feel, motivated, supported. And I've been very fortunate in my career to work with amazing global teams over the years. And I'm passionate about building programs that are fair, transparent, and aligned to how the company actually grows. And then outside of work, I'm a continuous learner, like to learn new things. I mentor others or try to do things where I can make processes smoother and smarter for other people. So thank you again. I'm so excited to be here and to share a little bit of my experience with you.
Awesome. We are super thrilled to have you as well. And why don't we start with the journey itself, right? So, starting from financial analysis and right now leading global sales comp strategy and execution and administration and the whole 9 yards. What's been a key milestone or like a turning point, that really shaped the way you approach sales comp today?
Well, honestly, it's been gradual evolution for me, not one big moment that said, "Oh, I'm gonna do comp." And I think that's how it is with most comp people. You don't start out in comp, you kind of end up. So I really started back in the day with financial analysis, really focusing on learning data, data extraction. Back when I'm old enough to live the history of computers. So back then, when you actually had to write on mainframes and extract data, and then over time, I was able to see how like data connects to everything, how it influences decisions, shapes your strategy, and then ultimately impacts sales and people in general.
Got it. And you also mentioned that because you talked about being in the midst of all the data, and looking at sales strategy on the other end. So, just curious to know that how do you use this data to tell the story behind sales performance and uh, build comp plans that actually drive performance or like meet the company's objectives. So, how do you do it?
So that is the favorite part, like my favorite part of the job is data does tell the story. So it's not just numbers on a dashboard, right? You have to really dig in. You have to look for the patterns, explain not you have to explain why things happen, not just what happened, right? So when you're designing a comp plan, um, you have to figure out one, what motivates the team. So what's working, what's not working, what where a plan might actually be driving the wrong behavior. Because sometimes the data, it surprises you. Like you have a plan and you say, oh God, this looks great on paper, right? But it doesn't match how they actually sell. So when you're translating data, it has to be something human, making the numbers align with how people actually work, right? What actually drives them to succeed. So one of the ones, and this is a book I would suggest anyone read if they're in this type of business. It's a book called How to Lie with Statistics by Daryl Duff. It was written 50 some years ago. But one of the parts that sticks with me, especially when it comes to comp, is correlation versus causation, right? Just because two things relate doesn't mean one causes the other. So let me think of an example. Let's say you notice territories, right? And one territory seems to have more client meetings and higher revenue, right? It doesn't necessarily mean just having more meetings drives sales, right? It could be that those territories have stronger demand or it's a more experienced rep. Sometimes the data might look a certain way, but it's ultimately the experience of the rep. So it's a great reminder for me is to dig deeper, to understand what the real story is behind the numbers.
Got it. I think that's beautifully put. And I just have a small follow up to it. What are probably some of the core metrics or core data points that you look at when building comp plan, let's say for 2026? What do you focus on and look at? Territory is one example which you give, but then what are the other leading indicators that you look at to say that, hey, this plan probably did so much in 2025. We need to tweak it in these aspects to make it perform even better. So, just curious about how you build comp plans based on what leading indicators for your business.
Well, first you have to understand the business goals, right? So what is the goals? Let's say, here's a good example. Like if you have a planned obsolescence, so maybe 1 year you comped it at a higher rate. But this year you really want to obsolete it, but you don't want to totally get rid of it, but you're planning for the obsolescence. So when you put that in the bag, you might have to say, okay, we need to plan to lower obsolescence, right? Or maybe you want a new product in your bag. So then you're going to add more to that in your bag. So ultimately, it comes down to when you're looking at the numbers, you have to align with the business goals that drive the right behavior, right? The science of the data is how we model it in different scenarios. So you're running the numbers, you're making everything aligned. And then you have to look at the people side, right? So how will they perceive the plan? Will it motivate them? Whether it feels achievable? Does it align with the business goals? So one of the things I think is very important is that you loop leaders across everything. You loop sales, finance, HR, even legal in there. And then another thing I like to do is I like to network with other comp professionals, right? So that gives you insights like, what are you seeing in the market? Here's what I'm seeing in the market, but what do you see in the market, right? This is how my plan went last year. This is yours. And granted, there is some confidentiality, but you can certainly, with other comp people, talk about general things because it's always do X and you get Y. So, how are we executing on X to get to Y?
Got it. Great. Uh, so one thing that I wanted to double click on from what you said was the legal and compliance side of things. About you mentioned how important it is to bring them into the loop early. So why is that? What how do you think it adds value for the sales comp function, or where do you think it helps a lot in your day to day processes?
Thank you for bringing that up. That is a very important puzzle piece that I find most companies overlook. And it is one of the most common pitfalls I see in companies when they design comp plans without fully considering local labor laws or regulatory requirements. Something that, seems like a very simple plan can create a compliance nightmare. So, for example, I am global. So, there are countries where you can't pay bonuses less frequently than a certain schedule, or overtime rules might apply. In other places, your labor councils or workers' councils must approve incentive. So it's very important that honestly, I keep legal and HR on speed dial. So you want to just stay ahead of the game. You want to partner closely with legal and HR from the very beginning. And then also, I keep myself up to date when I have a free moment. I'll look because even within the United States, California has its own labor laws separate than all the rest of the country, right? So you have to understand and it's very important as a comp person, if you see something, say something early, bring legal in early and tell them what's going on so you can have a game plan if something comes to fruition, when you're doing that. So another thing I would tell comp professionals is try when you're working with legal and HR to make the terms and conditions of your plan as flexible as possible if you are in an international or even in the US now, if you're in that market so that you can adjust quickly as rules change and be proactive to, catch potential issues before they become a problem. And then you also still want to make sure that you keep the plan motivating and fair. Because if you have to do something special for one group and the other group doesn't get it, then that could be perceived that you're not being fair. So writing the plans that are going to work across the gamut.
Got it. Awesome. I think that's wonderfully summed up. And um, the need of the hour, or rather, what's looming ahead is 2026, right? And that means new comp plans, which you would probably roll out to your global sales teams, and rollouts, how messy it can get, or the complexities involved. Would love to hear your take on how to handle it smoothly, or what your best practices are.
So I think the biggest thing you have to remember is, salespeople are people, right? And then you have to center the people approach. Yeah, you not only have to make sure your team understands the plans, but they have to trust you, right? They have to know that they can trust you, that you're fair, that you're genuinely open to hearing their thoughts and concerns, right? But you have to create transparency that people feel supported and motivated. If if they don't feel like they can come to you or they don't feel like you're doing the data right, they're more worried about, "Hey, oh my god, is my plan right? Like, I gotta check everything. I gotta make sure everything's right." Then they're not selling because they're people. They have lives, they have mortgages, they have babies, they have people to feed, right? And if they're so worried about, "I'm gonna get paid right," or "There's no one I can call," they're gonna be so focused on that and not actually doing your job. Another thing I think when you're rolling it out is after the first couple months, you should be aware, like, look at what people's doing, right? So we think, here's an example. So we, at one company, I rolled out a plan, and some of our people were hitting their targets, but they weren't really hitting the one product line that we wanted them to hit, and so they could get extra bonuses. So calling them up or working with the sales leaders to say, "Hey, I noticed when I paid Q1, they're not really selling this new product. They're hitting their quota, but we really wanted them to focus on it." So having another session with them to explain, "Hey, look, you're missing something, right?" So that you're motivating them to say, "Hey, look, you did great, but you can get accelerators or you can get this extra bonus. Did you realize that this was part of the plan?" So always making sure you're having the feedback on the plan and that you're watching what's going on. Because if it's not doing, I've had plans that didn't work. And then you might have to reset the plan, part of the year if it's not working. But make sure, again, that you're open, that they will welcome that feedback or they can call you or you can call them, and making that connection so that it helps, the product line's going to improve when they start selling it, reps are going to make more money, and then it helps everyone.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head with respect to the job not ending just by rolling out. You have to make sure that the reps are, trained on the plans. They understand everything very clearly, and also monitor it for the first few months to see if it's actually uh, making the progress that you expected. And if not, correct it immediately and not wait for it to stall and move towards behaviors that you don't want to encourage. So I think that's a great point, right? And one thing that our listeners particularly expect from our speakers is that AI is all over the place, right? And also in sales comp. So how do you envision AI taking a bigger role in the coming years, and what's been your experience so far with it?
Well, AI is great for some things, but for comp, I don't think it's there yet in the things I'm testing. Again, there is that human thing. And with comp, there's always exceptions and specialties. If all comp plans were just do X, get Y, that's great. AI can handle it. But then when you're using something like Salesforce, people are human, right? AI can't understand. It's only going to take the data that's in there. This is where you need a human to say, "Oops, that was entered wrong," or "Oops, it didn't feed through right," or "We didn't program it right." So I think there's a place in AI maybe getting the data, but you still are going to need a human to make sure that there's no errors in the data. And AI is good for some of the models when you want to model out the comp plan. But how can you program AI to fix human error? That's one of the things that would concern me, because I think you're still going to need salespeople. So if the salespeople have a problem with the model, who are they going to talk to? The AI? How's the AI going to fix their model for them? So it's still, I think, a more people version, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And yeah, I think we are near the last part of this podcast, and what we'd love from you is if you were to share a piece of advice to all sales comp practitioners out there on uh, what they need to be prepared for in the coming years, something like a best practice, or what would that be from your lens?
So there's a few things. One, you have to have an understanding of the business, and it just can't be numbers, right? So look, I we all do it. I'll get caught up in my spreadsheet and formula, which I love. But at the end of the day, we have jobs because sales sells, right? So comp exists to drive the behavior that supports the business, and you have to keep the bigger picture in mind. Along with keeping the bigger picture in mind, like I said, you have to build trust and communicate openly. Plans won't succeed if your teams don't understand them or feel confident that you are administering them in an accurate and a fair way. And you have to be approachable and transparent and willing to listen when the team calls, right? And finally, I would say Be curious and embrace the data. The data can be your superpower, right? If you learn to interpret it, if you can find the patterns in the data and you can tell an accurate story, right? I go back to the book of How to Lie with Statistics, right? If you don't do the baselines or you don't do the charts and the graphs right, right? Then you're not telling the right story behind the numbers. And so then the impact you make is not good. So understanding your bias, understanding how to interpret the data, and then you can have an impact on the decision and performance of your company because the more successful your comp plan is, you have a job because sales sells and you're compensating them for what they're selling.
Awesome. And very well summed up. And that brings us to the end of this great episode of Go To Masters. Big thanks to Jane for sharing your experiences and valuable insights with us. And remember, folks, you can tune in every week to learn more from game changers driving hypergrowth companies across the globe. Go To Masters is brought to you by Everstage, your trusted partner for transforming the way businesses handle sales compensation. I'm your host, Anirudh, signing off. Thank you.